Alright, hey guys, missing y'all. Can't pick on y'all as much and mess around with you as much with this kind of format. But we'll get back to that eventually. Y'all don't make me completely crazy when y'all come back. But I hope y'all are doing good. This section here is going to be dealing with mainly genetics type stuff. So before we get into that, what we're going to do is go ahead and do the quiz for section 1. And so you can use your book obviously, so it's basically going to function like a worksheet. So just go back through and fill out the information for that quiz. So that'll be quiz for 11.1. So go ahead and do that, and then we'll move on to today's lesson with section 2. So you can pause right here and go ahead and do the quiz. Alright, now that y'all have taken the quiz and done well with that, we're going to move on to section 2. Section 2, like I said, is with genetics. And so this is kind of some cool stuff to play around with and just kind of look at because it's just interesting, really. And so I figure probably the guys will probably like some of this, Thomas and Zai, and Mason probably will too. Some of you girls may not as much, but it's okay, we'll have some fun with it. So this is going to be genetics, and this is going to deal with heredity. So 402 is where we're going to start at heredity, and so y'all can go ahead and read through from page 402 through page 406, and once you're done with that, you can come back and listen to the high points of the lesson. So go ahead and pause right here and do your reading, and again, it's just a few pages, 402 through 406, and make sure to stop at the Punnett squares. So just where it says Punnett squares, you can stop at that section on page 406. So we're going to pause. Alright, now just going through it here. Heredity on page 402 is the transmission of characteristics from parent to offspring. And so as you pass things along from parent to offspring, that's going to be heredity. Those things that you are basically passed along is heredity. Now those characteristics are transmitted through genes, and so heredity basically functions as the transmission of characteristics, so that's the actual transmission, and then the genes is the actual mechanism. It's what's actually doing the pushing. It's what's actually carrying information along. And so the genes or the characteristics are transmitted through genes. So the characteristics are transmitted through genes. So genetics itself is the scientific study of heredity, and this involves studying how the physical body and features of an organism come from the genes that it inherited from its parents. And so genetics is the actual scientific study of this stuff. So that gets you through the big points there on page 402. One little thing you need to kind of key in there also though is that little italics part there in that second paragraph. It says an organism's environment and other factors also play a role in genetic traits. For example, a bean plant may have the genes that would make it grow taller than most other bean plants, but insufficient nutrients and water or unsuitable climate can shut its growth down. And so even though you may have the genetic structure to possibly be something, other factors can kind of inhibit that. So just because a bean plant has the genetic information that says it should be tall, if it's going through a drought or whatever, that plant's not going to be as tall as it could be. But generally, if you put a similar plant there in that same field, then the tall plants should be taller than those plants that don't have that tall gene, relative if everything else is the same. And so that's how that pretty much functions. So the next section is reproduction and heredity. So just looking through it there, it says, consider how boring the world would be if all people, members of the human races, and dogs all looked identical. And so just think about if everybody looked the same, there wouldn't be any diversity, there wouldn't be anything, it'd just be kind of boring. Everybody would look the same. And so heredity and reproduction and genetics is basically what allows for diversity in God's world. And so humans look different because of the genes that are passed down from one generation to the next, and then that generation passes it down to the next, and so that's how you get a diverse population, diverse organisms, and all that is because of heredity and those genes that are passed down. And so You have a couple different types of reproduction. You have asexual reproduction, which is where a single parent, this is on page 403, a single parent organism produces offspring without the union of reproductive cells. So all unicellular organisms and many multicellular organisms can reproduce through asexual reproduction. And so asexual reproduction requires no reproductive cells, combining of reproductive cells. Is basically all union of them. It's all done basically with a different process. And so, continuing on there, it says vegetative reproduction, which is where a growth of a new plant from a leaf stem or root of an existing plant is a form of asexual reproduction. Also, non-seed plants and many fungi can reproduce asexually using one-celled reproductive structures called spores. And so again, the spore spreads, it takes root, it grows, or whatever. And so what happens is you don't actually need the combining of the male and female reproduction system. It's just one can do it. So that is asexual reproduction. Next, down there at the bottom of that page, you have mitosis. This one's very important. You need to take a key note of. It says, at the cellular level, asexual reproduction occurs through mitosis, which is the process by which a cell divides to form two new cells, both having identical characteristics and carrying on the same life function as the parent cell. In mitosis, the cell makes a copy of each of its chromosomes and then divides to form two daughter cells. And so if you look at the actual picture there, at the bottom of the page 403, you have one cell, and then that cell is going to basically start dividing on the inside. The chromosomes are going to start dividing and copying each other. And so you notice there you go from them being together, then they form the X-type pattern, and then they're going to split. And so you go from that big circle to the next circle where the stuff on the inside is starting to copy itself, and then you wind up with two new circles down there at the bottom, which represents the division of the cell. So you have one dividing to make two. And then that's how we're going to work through that. Now, that's different than meiosis, which is on that other side, which is what we're about to hit. And so if you look at sexual reproduction is reproduction through fertilization, the union of gametes, which are your reproductive cells, the egg and the sperm, and they're going to produce a new organism. So body cells contain two copies of each gene, each copy on a different chromosome. So one copy inherited from each parent, but a gamete contains only one copy of each gene, or half of the parent's genetic information. So the gamete is going to only take in half of the information. So when the gametes unite, the process of fertilization, the result is a single fertilized egg known as a zygote. Since the sperm cell and egg cell each contain one copy of each gene, the zygote contains two copies of each gene. So once they come together, you're going to have two copies of each gene at that point, and that is what the zygote is. So if you look at, this is where it brings into the meiosis structure. So if you look there at the bottom of page 403, it says gametes form when special cells and reproductive organs undergo a type of cell division called meiosis. The chromosomes are copied before meiosis begins, so that the cell has four copies of each gene. Meiosis involves two separate cell divisions producing four gamete cells total. During the divisions, the chromosomes are distributed so that each of the four gametes produced in meiosis contains one copy of each gene, or half the genetic information of the parent cell. So you notice there it starts where before meiosis you have two copies of each gene, then the cell copies DNA and divides it twice, separating the gene copies, and then at the very end you get gametes containing one copy of each gene. So it's going to produce four different ones, one containing each one copy of each gene. So that'll get you through the meiosis and mitosis. And again, what I would look at is actually the chart there, because the chart is not so much definitional, it just kind of implies it and kind of simplifies it, and so you can actually see it happening. And so the chart there on page 403 of mitosis and meiosis is a good thing to be looking at. Then the last page deals with the transfer of genetic information, or page 404, contains genetic information. And so you have, it says, God has designed three main processes that allow the transfer and use of genetic information. That is replication, which allows the information to be transferred from one generation to the next, and transcription and translation allow the information to be transferred within the cell and used to manufacture cell components. And so one allows the information to be transferred from one generation to the next. So that is going to be your your replication. And then you have transcription and translation, which basically allows it to just go from cell to cell. So it's not carried so much to the next generation as far as the organism. The big picture is just a small picture of transfer from one cell to the next. And so replication is the process by which the cell makes a copy of the DNA before dividing. Replication is carried out by a complex array of cellular machinery. So you need to know that. Picking up there you have, it talks about amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins. So amino acids, the building blocks of proteins. You have ribosomes, which the cell must transfer this information from the DNA in the nucleus to the ribosomes, which are protein-producing factories in the cytoplasm. So protein-producing factories in the cytoplasm are ribosomes. Then you get to RNA, which is similar to DNA, but it's not suitable for long-term information storage. So RNA is produced through the process of transcription, in which the DNA information of a simple gene is copied into a molecule of RNA. So after transcription, special proteins carry on RNA blueprint. Translation then, continuing on, is basically, it allows, in translation, a ribosome reads the RNA1 codon, a word in the DNA and RNA language at a time. So each codon specifies a particular amino acid. As the ribosome reads each codon, it adds the corresponding amino acid to the protein it's building. And so basically, again, a lot of times pictures can share 1,000 words that the words don't even explain to you. And so if you look at the actual picture of replication, translation, and transcription there on the page, that'll help you a lot with those definitions and putting them together. So replication is DNA copied into 2 identical strands of new DNA. Transcription is where DNA is copied into RNA, and then translation is where RNA translated by ribosomes into protein. So that picture will help you. And the final couple things here, just to kind of hit before we'll leave you, is on page 405. You have alleles, which are there on about the middle of the page. It says each parent transmits one copy of the gene for each trait to the offspring. A gene for a particular trait, such as seed color, will have different forms. These different forms are called alleles. So it's the different forms that come about through the transference of genetic information. Homozygous is going to be homozygous if 2 alleles for seeds and 2 alleles are green, so it's homozygous. If the 2 alleles are different than the other seeds, the organism is heterogeneous. So hetero means different, homo means the same. And so if they come out the same, that is homozygous. If they come out different, that is heterozygous. And we'll pick up that some a little bit when we pick up a little bit deeper. Laws of heredity. A dominant trait shows up in the offspring even if an allele for a different trait is also present. So dominant, if you have the dominant trait, it's going to present itself as such, even if you don't have the other one that matches it. So the law of dominance states that if an allele for a different trait is also present, this is a fact that is known as law of dominance. So that basically means it's going to show up. So if you have one dominant out of the 2, then it's going to be dominant is what's going to be present itself. That's law of dominance. A recessive trait is a trait that does not appear in the offspring when the dominant allele is present. So if it's recessive, if you have that trait but it doesn't present itself, then that means it's recessive. And the thing with recessive genes is they basically have to match up to present themselves. So you would have to have both sets, like you would have to get the recessive gene from your mom and from your dad. So you have to have 2 recessive genes for it to actually present itself. And so that's the key information there. And then the last thing is genotype and phenotype. And it says the capital and lowercase letters describe the genotype, which is the actual combination of alleles that the organism has. And then the appearance that results from the genotype is the phenotype. And so we're going to pick up this information more tomorrow when we do Punnett squares, but just kind of keep those definitions in your mind when we move on. So genotype is the actual combination, and then phenotype is what it presents. So that'll be good for us today. We'll pick up the rest of it tomorrow So I hope y'all have a good day.